Hello and welcome to the Choreolosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz and this is episode 116. What is our main job? In this episode, it's going to be a little bit of a different one. I don't have a guest. Actually, more accurately, I have many guests. In that, I kind of stirred the pot a little bit on Facebook this weekend on purpose, of course, because I wanted to get a conversation started amongst colleagues about how important the core principles of our academic content are to how we define ourselves, how we do our job, and more importantly, how we evaluate whether or not we're doing a good job. I make the following argument. Many of you have heard me outline this argument for years now. Our main job is to teach music. That's why we're being paid. That's why people are sending their kids to us, and that's why people at the college level are signing up and paying large amounts of money to be educated. They want to learn how to do music well. That's why we have a profession. That is my argument. I also argue that music, when taught correctly, of any kind, is an academic pursuit of scholarship. It is not an activity like football. It's not a sport, and it's not a thing you sign your kids up to do to have fun. That's not what it's for. Can you have fun doing it? Yes, you can. But if you really enjoy math, you can have fun doing math too. These are two tangential issues. So I'm just going to dive right into several different Facebook threads. And of course, I have no interest in outing people by name. So I'm not going to be using names. I'm going to simply be reading some of the dialogue and commenting here on what is going on with this conversation because as I said, I stirred the pot a little bit and I made a claim. I made a pretty simply worded but very concise claim. And of course, whenever you do that on the internet, you draw out some people who disagree, and you also draw out a lot of people who agree. But what's usually true is that we're not always super clear with what the other person is talking about when we're doing these little short exchanges back and forth, which of course is the value of a podcast. So that is my purpose here today, is to help you think through some of these things. And I'm also, of course, interested in your opinions as well. So in the Choreolosophers Facebook group is one of the main feeds that this conversation happened on. And you can go there and add your voice to the conversation as well. So July saw another month of unprecedented growth on the Patreon. Patreon.com/Choreolosophy is a place where for as little as $3 a month, you can support the show. You can also get access to my Google folder of goodies. You can get access to full-length episodes. You can get access to behind-the-scenes episodes and so much more. So head on over there and subscribe today. The producer-level sponsors at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Jeff Wall, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Okay, so here is the claim. And I posted this on the Choreolosophers group, on the Choreolosophy Podcast Facebook page, as well as on my personal page. And I got some fascinating conversations going in all three places. Here was the claim. The future of the choral vocal music education profession, long term, will depend on the quality and persistence of music literacy and vocal pedagogy instruction. So, again, we have to do our jobs well. And as I argued before, I believe that our jobs are to teach kids how to do music well. That is my main function. That's why I have a job. It is not, notice that I did not say that it is my only function. It's my core function. Now, of course, you can imagine that what comes from that is disagreements, right? There's all kinds of ways you could honestly disagree with that statement. First one I got was that this has nothing to do with the long-term health of our profession. The long-term advance of the profession has only to do with the people that make the decisions as to whether to allow it to exist in schools and churches. Okay, that's a rebuttal, and of course that's a good point in the sense that we need decision makers with power to support us as well. I totally agree. However, I can't control what the politician or the church deacon thinks. I can control what they perceive when they see my choral program. And that's where the quality matters. So again, I don't disagree with this person in saying that yeah, we can have a great choir, but if they don't support us, it doesn't really matter because they might shut the program down. And my rebuttal to that, or my argument to that, is that they are less likely to shut us down if we are producing a high quality product that lots of people want to participate in, and that lots of parents think is enriching the lives of their kids, and that has turned into an integral part of a community, the school or the church. If those things are happening, then it is much harder for the politician to pull the plug on that program. And that is much more likely to be the case when the program is high quality. When the choirs sound good, when they can read music well, those things are just more likely to be the case. Okay, so of course, that's a really important thing. So it's a bit of a chicken versus an egg conversation. I get that. The way I think of it is that we have control over what we bring into the classroom, and that's it. We can't control our Capitol buildings, but what we can do is decide that for however long we have our classroom, with however many students we have, that they deserve to be taught how their voice works, how to use it efficiently and beautifully, and all the things that they want to learn how to do when they sing, and that they should be able to read music. Okay, that's extremely important. There are lots of other things. Please understand, there are lots of other things they should know how to do too, but that's the core things. And by the way, I have run a bunch of polling in the last week as well on this question. Those two things consistently, hundreds of people have responded, of colleagues. Those two things also raise to the top of every single poll. What is our most important things we teach? How to use your voice, how to read music. Okay, for what it's worth, if you disagree. Okay, so here's another response. This person says, I agree, but I think that part of the conversation of future of choral vocal music education is expanding the definition of music literacy and being expansive in our pedagogies. This person says that she loves these types of conversations. And I agree that our definition of lots of things can expand, but I cautioned that we have to be careful that the definition doesn't expand into like a Hegelian dialectic way or a deconstructionist way, where it expands into the non-A category. So you can define A as A plus 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 plus, but you can't define A as non-A, or else the two things negate each other. So here's what I mean by that. Literacy, the definition of literacy, has to do with reading and writing. Okay. Now there are alternate definitions that rely on that original definition, where sometimes we use that word literacy to mean that just knowledge about a thing. So you can talk about that thing also, but that's actually not what the word literacy means. I mean, think about the root word there: literate, literally, and that all of those root words are the word book, write. Okay, so these are things, if you are literate, you can read and write. That is the core definition of the word literate. And so we have to be careful that if we're talking about expanding the definition of the word literacy, we shouldn't also include cannot read and write, because that's trying to define a word as A and non-A, and you just negated the reason for the word. If literate can mean can read or write, or can't read or write, then everyone's literate. At which point, why have the word at all? And that's a philosophical concept that I'm really sensitive to, because I think that's a really dangerous thing to do, is when you take words and define them as their opposites, and then you don't have any... I had this argument once with what is political. And of course, the definition of political, the original one, the core definition, is having to do with policy, political, policy, and law. So if it has to do with those things, it's political. And then, but there is a deconstructionist definition, which is that politics has to do with anything that has to do with human interaction. And then I went, whoa, 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 whoa. You just negated the definition of politics. If politics is supposed to be one type of human interaction involving the law, and you just expanded it to mean all of the interactions that don't involve the law, you just negated the word politics. And now everything's political or nothing is, in which case that word doesn't help us anymore. Right? So this is, I think, going on a lot right now. This is a very popular thing, and it's actually at the core of this disagreement that some folks are having with my position here. Okay, so that one was a good point. It is good to expand the definition as long as we're not expanding it into the negating territory. Now, this person said that the long-term future of choral vocal music education will depend solely on the ability of teachers to help people find the joy of expressing themselves fully through singing. A technique, good or bad, is useless without the ability to communicate real emotion, to create something that moves people. The technique is only there to extend the ability of the singer to be expressive. The reason the future of the whole art form is in doubt is that too many singers and choirs are irrelevant in the way they perform music. Music of all eras can and should be performed with an understanding of that speaks to people in the modern age. Of course, music literacy helps, but I have choirs of non-music readers who sing wonderfully in cathedrals because they understand this concept. Okay, so there's a lot of good stuff here. I actually agree with a lot of that. So it is important that choirs learn to be relevant in the modern age. It is important that they learn to be expressive. I think the thing that I find interesting and a little bit frustrating about this response, though, is that it isn't a rebuttal to mine. In other words, teaching people to use their voice really well, which is, again, this is all I said. Teach kids to use their voice well and read music well does not imply at all that those other things are not true. So it's a little bit of a non sequitur, although he's not wrong. There is absolutely, those things are important. Now, I would just add, though, that in my view, it does make it easier for singers to get to that joyful, expressive place when they are not frustrated by the learning process and when they feel really good at it. Because it's one more barrier between us and the performer. And so I'm going to suggest that that's still the core part of our job. Now, it is also, again, important to make a distinction that I'm talking about mostly in a school setting, because I'm talking about the things that are important for us to teach. Now, if I'm working in a church that is not a music reading church, for example, and music is taught by rote, I am not criticizing that at all, because the function is different. The purpose is different of the choir in that situation. They are there to worship. They're not there to read music. They're not there to learn stuff about reading music. That's not why they're there, and that's not why they signed up. And they don't have that same moral imperative to develop the brain and the whole brain as we do when we have students in a school. So these are different types of situations. Here's another one. This was really good too. This hadn't spurned a lot of. This was probably the most popular response for the crowd that thinks my general premise has some problems and some holes. I think that while music literacy and proficiency is necessary for the preservation of Western art music, what is more important is that music educators teach students to love music and want to keep it in their lives, therefore growing up to be adults who want to support the arts because they themselves had positive experience. We need teachers who care about students. Music knowledge as well as a well of information is a given. I'm going to say that again. Music knowledge as a well of information is a given. The art itself would vanish if no one cared to preserve it. I don't know that it's a given, actually. Music knowledge as a well of information is a given. We have to work to maintain that. It's never a given. I could be misunderstanding what he means. Music programs by themselves will persist as long as teachers teach them to love music as an art form and provide a place for them to belong. Now, with that last statement, I vehemently disagree. And I'm going to read it again. Music programs by themselves will persist as long as teachers teach them to love music. I disagree. I think we, especially in a climate where politicians are looking for the possibility of which programs need to go, they're going to be looking for whether or not we add academic value. Okay, so if we aren't doing these academic, if we don't have a core we can point to of what we are teaching and why it adds academic value, we are putting ourselves at risk. But that's not even the only reason I disagree. I also believe that in general, there are exceptions to this, but in general, kids, especially kids, like to gravitate to activities that they feel like they're good at. And teaching kids to read and teaching kids to use their voices well are essential to whether or not the kid feels good at it. And if they don't feel good at it after a year or two in your class, they're going to quit. And I think that that's really important. Again, in the long run, they are bullshit detectors too. And if they're not getting good at those things and you just keep telling them they are, they're going to figure it out. Especially when they hear a choir from across town who can do all these things. And then they're going to go, what have we been learning? And I've seen that happen so many times. That happened to the choir that I taught my very first job. They figured out real fast how bad we were, and it wasn't because I told them. It was because they just looked across town to see the choir next door. Their friends were in that choir, and they were hungry to be able to do those things. And we grew the program, became more inclusive because more and more people were coming in the door once we started to teach solid core fundamentals. So of course I responded to this, and I said I agree with some of the main premises, which I do, because he said that it is literacy and proficiency is necessary for the preservation of Western art music. I agree, but it's also necessary for the preservation of a lot of other forms of music. Music notation has spread the globe, not because of it was carried on colonial ships and and sent around with guns, but it spread around the globe because it's a good idea. It is a really good system. Anyone who is wanting to create a different and better system would always be welcome to do that. But that's very difficult because this notation system, even though you could point out flaws, is really good and it's very versatile. And you can write down a lot of music using that system. Okay, there are other systems that have been created around the world that didn't spread around the world, partly because they are not as versatile. Okay, so that's important. The modern notation that we all use is vital to the survival of a lot of kinds of music, even the types of music that did not originate from Europe. That is my opinion, but it is also a scholarly studied opinion. Okay, and then the other aspect of this comment that I was struggling with was that there's some non sequitur going on here. Caring about students has nothing to do with whether or not we are teaching our core principles well. You should be able to do both. To me, there is no reason that, yes, we should care about our students should be used as a rebuttal to we must teach pedagogy and literacy well in order for the profession to survive long term. Those are unrelated. Unrelated. You're right, we do have to do both. But again, the argument that I'm going to make in this episode is that we have to do both, but we have to start with competence. In a school. We are a school. I find this to be a very strange moment in time where I've used that we're going to come to this example later, but I might as well go here before many of you tune out because you're mad at me. But would we apply these standards to our math colleagues or our history colleagues? I would venture to say no. So in other words, if I had a math teacher and I was determining whether or not I think this is a good math teacher, and I noticed that, year after year, semester after semester, their students can't add or subtract very well, and their math proficiency is way below grade level consistently. But by gosh, those kids have fun in that class, and the teacher really makes them feel like they belong. They laugh and they have fun. They end up really liking math. Now, it's not really the math that we think they should learn as a society, but whatever version of math they're thinking they're learning, they're really enjoying that because the teacher is engaging and inclusive and all of the things that we want them to be. But then at the end of the day, they suck at math. Most people would call that person not a very good math teacher. And I am flabbergasted that we are trying to make that argument for music teachers. Our students should be good at music, or we are not doing our job. And yes, we also want them to all those other things. We want them to feel like they belong. We want them to feel like they can contribute. We want them to have fun. We want them to smile and we want them to laugh. But at the end of the day, we are being paid to do a job. Okay, we're going to come back to that again in a little bit. There were a lot of responses under this one. This one is good. So somebody came into that very same thread and said that they thought that this person's point was much better than my point, which is fine. That doesn't hurt my feelings. That happens up to me all of the time. And I replied that I think that person's point was good too, and that we have to care about students, and we have to, to develop a lifelong loves of music. Like that's a really important part of what we do as well. And of course, I'm just reminding everyone anytime I jump into this post that we can do both. I said I'm scratching my head about this because they're just not opposites of each other. They're not two sides of the same coin. They're not even on the same coin. In fact, all of the things that are being listed here as rebuttals of belonging, inclusion, having fun, feeling like they have a place within your classroom, those things are true of every class. But what we're talking about here is what makes someone, what is our core job as music teachers? So again, this is that dialectical negation going on again. If the job of every teacher is the same, in other words, it doesn't matter how good our students are at the content that we're teaching, what really matters is if they belong, and that's true of every teacher, then there is no reason anymore for us to have subjects. What is the purpose? You could just hire a group of 20 social workers to sit around and play with kids and make them feel good about themselves. And I would point out that in that extreme, and I'm being a little bit intentionally hyperbolic here, but in that extreme, that sense of self-esteem that those social workers could give those kids while they're not learning anything, not achieving anything, not creating anything of value for society, not learning how to do math, learning how to read, not learning how to interpret poetry, not learning how to do all the things that an education should teach them to do, that self-esteem is going to be fleeting. That is not going to last. That is not going to last. Ultimately, teachers don't give students self-esteem. It's got self right in the word. It's self-esteem. They have to build it themselves. We are showing them tools that they can use to build their own self-esteem. And so I said that I hear where you're coming from, but I think my disagreement with the people on this post that are taking issue is more of a chicken and egg type disagreement. I really just don't think you can have one of these without the other, long term and in a real meaningful way. I think that you have to have academic rigor. I think you have to have academic quality in order to have the sense of belonging and inclusion and fun that comes from the reducing of the stress of the student when they feel like they are becoming good at the thing. Okay, so a lot of our anxiety that students have when they're in classrooms, I think we misdiagnose. It's not because we're pushing them too hard. It's because they feel like they suck. And in a classroom where the teacher is not even telling themselves or telling their colleagues online that those things are really important skills, I feel like the kids are missing out if they have a teacher like that. And I'm not directing that comment at any particular person on this post. That's more of a if the shoe fits, wear it kind of a comment. And so this person said that I personally strive for both in my school program, which is great. That's what I'm saying. We should do both. However, I've seen schools whose programs were weak on vocal ped and weak on sight reading, but the teachers were helping to develop incredible people, some of the kindest students I've ever met. Now, here it is, everyone. This is the problem. This is the problem. And I replied, I kind of took the gloves off a little bit. I said, then our disagreement would be more substantive, because I would say that teacher needs to do their job and teach the content. If their students are weak in the content, then participate in professional development and become better at teaching it. We are not social workers. We are music educators. I absolutely believe in teaching the arts of personhood in my class, but a music education curriculum is my vehicle for doing this. It absolutely needs to be both, and that is a hill I will die on. In other words, the implication, and I fully acknowledge that I could be misinterpreting this because it's Facebook, but the implication I got from that is as long as the kids are kind, okay, as long as they're happy and content, then that music teacher is doing a good enough job. And I could not disagree more. I think if the content is not being taught to mastery, and the students are not getting better at music, then that teacher is not doing their job. And that is true of a math teacher. That is true of a history teacher. If your history students cannot talk about with any level of intelligence things that happened during the time period that you studied, then I'm sorry, you didn't do your job. It is our job to teach kids to do music. I'm baffled that I'm having to have this conversation. Now, we did get back into it, and this was all, very, very congenial, and it helped to articulate where our disagreement is. Um, and I appreciate that, because I think that this is a really important conversation, and I don't want to scare people off, which is why I'm not calling anyone out by name. However, these are all public conversations. And I said, yes, we are now getting to the meat of some of our straight up disagreements, and that's okay. But I did point out here that there is a lot of this straw man argument going on, which I've posted about many times, and we've had conversations on this show about, because I have never once implied that choral music is not an important tool for developing the whole person. I've done whole episodes on this. I am not presenting an either or scenario. So kind of thinking back to my original post. Okay, my original post was, got to scroll back up so I get the wording. The future of choral vocal music education profession long term will depend on the quality and persistence of music literacy and vocal pedagogy instruction. Okay, and so far I have not been convinced that that is not right. Okay, so that is my claim, and nowhere in the claim did I say that nothing else is important. What I am arguing, though, is if we drop the standard for music educators and have it be optional whether or not kids are learning to read music and learning to sing well, however you define sing well, by the way, lots of room for disagreement on what the right approach to the vocal pedagogy aspect is. Lots of room for disagreement for how literacy is applied in a classroom, how it's taught. Okay, but in my opinion, those two things should be non-negotiable, and you should be good at them. Good at them, like proficient. You should be able to teach your kids to teach other people those things, because that's how we really know if our students know, if they learned. Can your students teach those things to other people? And all of these things that my colleagues are bringing up in this thread are going to come from that. If they can appreciate how difficult the art form is, they are more likely to be a supporter of the arts later down the road. They are more likely to be a consumer of the arts, because they'll listen to a choral recording or whatever kind of vocal recording or whatever it is, musical theater, and they will appreciate how much hard work that was. And they'll have a knowledge of the art form from its inner workings to really be able to listen and understand what's going on. And that is our long-term goal. Not playing patty cake in a circle so that they have fun. There is way more to life than that. And then we get another response that is pretty long here, and so I'm just going to read this because I think it's all valid. There are valid responses going on. This person says that there are so few things that every choral director will agree about. I guess the main reason why there is so much kerfuffle is people are taking this to mean music literacy and vocal pedagogy matters most in making sure that choral singing continues, so perhaps others feel more strongly about other factors. I don't think anyone will say that literacy, vocal ped don't matter, but maybe the argument lies in what matters more: music literacy and vocal pedagogy, or a love of the subject. There it is again. No. This is the love of the subject comes through the things we teach them about the subject. I have never met a person who really loves choral music who doesn't understand choral music, how it's made, or why it's made. You've got to learn. It's as an art form you have to learn to appreciate, and we have to teach them how to do it. Okay, and when we teach them how to do it, then they are more likely to love it. So again, it's a false dichotomy. I am not saying that we shouldn't be teaching kids to love it. I'm suggesting that this is how you do it. You go through the route of teaching them the content. Their love needs to come from their knowledge and competence of the content. And all of those other things spiral downhill from that. And they become easier, actually. Easier to achieve. All the things that these folks are talking about are easier to achieve when we meet them where they are with the content and build their skills and their confidence. And he goes on, it says it's probably impossible to determine, and people will most likely agree to disagree. Of course, they go hand in hand. Yes, I agree. They go hand in hand. Of course, we probably shouldn't have one without the other. Agreed. And yes, I understand that you are not advocating for an either-or situation, but perhaps this is why there is much disagreement. When it's definitely a given, quality music education is central to preservation of the art form as a whole. But see, that's the thing. It's not a given. This thread is evidence that it's not a given. I would argue that a love for music could have a broader implication when it comes to lifestyle that involves music, supporting music in school programs, going to the symphony, keeping it alive financially. But a high quality music education may open more doors and opportunities for students. It would enable them to participate in college choir and community choir and perhaps be practitioners themselves and competent musicians. Absolutely, totally agree. I know that I myself would not have found nearly as much success as a chorister or music educator had I not taken piano lessons growing up or been a part of a choir program that challenged me, where we practiced sight singing daily. Could I have developed into a strong musician without having had a strong musical background? Maybe, maybe not. But I also know that I had not caught the music bug along the way, probably would have not have chosen to go into this profession. So perhaps the best thing to say is that one cannot exist without the other, and the response is getting long, and I apologize for that. So this is great. This is fantastic. And so anybody who's listening, if you feel attacked because I read your comment, please don't, because this is why we have to have these conversations. Then we get into the meat of where the disagreement is. And with one gentleman on this thread, I think there is some pretty substantive disagreement, and I will recap that. I will take a hard pass on telling a music teacher that they're doing fine as long as their kids are kind, but they're not good at music. That I disagree. If that is your position, that they're kind and that they're having fun and that's enough, I completely disagree. However, most of this long comment that I just read, I agree with. But I will point out something. So this gentleman points out that he had advantages of piano lessons and a really strong choral program where they sight read every day. Now, to me, that I should point out the obvious there, that means that you had privileges that most of my students do not have until they get to my program, where we sight read every day. I'm making the argument, and you're going to hear more about this on the show, is that music literacy, or literacy in general, of any language, is equity. So when I was a kid in choir, the kids who could read music in choir were the kids who had the money to take piano lessons, or the money to play in band and buy an expensive clarinet, or the money to play in orchestra and buy a violin. Those were the kids that read music. Because we didn't practice sight reading every day, those kids continued to be the ones who read music. And guess who the kids were that when it was time to audition for the top level choirs, made it into the top level choirs? It was always those kids with privileges. I teach literacy as a core aspect of my program so that every kid can make it into the top choir if they want to. We use our Sight Reading Factory memberships for every single kid so that if they want to catch up to those band kids, and that happens, by the way, in my program all of the time. In fact, last year, we had a kid who was one of the top sight readers in the state. Missouri does a sight reading sing-off as a championship thing, and only the top sight readers from each district make it. This kid was, I think, the first African-American male student to be invited from KC Metro to that competition. He had never read a single note of music until 9th grade. He caught up and passed all of the other ones because we teach literacy every day in our class. So I just caution everyone, especially if you're a career musician already, which means that you had those advantages and someone taught you. So I would be very careful in making any type of proclamation about how maybe that's not super crucial to what we do. And I don't think anyone is saying that you shouldn't teach it. And I don't want to strawman anybody because I've been strawman 10 times today. So I don't want to do that to anyone else. But if you make an argument that those things are not core and fundamental to what a music teacher's job is, then we run the risk of some music teachers telling themselves that they don't really have to work that hard at that. And then the problem is that the inequality persists. The inequality, especially for singers, because when we have a lot of kids that take a vocal music class because their parents don't want to spend the money on the expensive instrumental classes. And so that's how we level the playing field, is by teaching solfege, whatever numbers or whatever it is, hand signs, creating some kinesthetic way for them to learn how to access the reading of the music is incredibly crucial for that reason as well. And I did make this interesting observation that, again, I hinted at this before, but that 90% of the responses seem to get what I mean. Most of the people that have responded to this post are cheering it on. That's 90% or so, because this is an issue that a lot of people are frustrated with, that we are having to defend this to our colleagues, because when we have to defend it to our colleagues, then we are also having to defend it to our administrators and to our students and we should honestly kind of be more unified on this. But the template that I've noticed is that I make the argument that we need to teach literacy and vocal pedagogy as core academic content. When kids feel confident in their abilities in these areas, they are more likely to enjoy choir long-term and stick around. They are also more likely to feel like they belong because they know they can contribute. The straw man version that I get in return is something like this, and these are templates. We need to not obsess about sight reading. Train little unfeeling machines who can read anything and have flawless techniques and sing like robots. It also does not matter if kids feel happy or like they belong in the class, because if they aren't good enough, we can just kick them out. That seems to be what people are hearing when I say that the most important part of our jobs is to teach kids how to sing well and read music. Okay, so that is a straw man, because I did not say that they should be unfeeling machines, that we should work on sight reading all class period long and not do anything else. In fact, my whole method that I've been helping the audience learn and understand is like 5 minutes a day. We do sight reading for like 5 minutes a day, and my kids can read anything. We do not obsess over sight reading. In fact, our method of sight reading gets us so much freer of our time to build the arts of personhood into the rehearsal, because we're not stressed about learning the notes. We're going to learn the notes like that. And then we have time to work on vocal pedagogy. We all have time to sit down and talk about our lives. We have time to sit down and talk about the poetry that we're singing. We have time to to sit down and talk about how the music and the time period interact and how the cultures interact that we are encountering on our journey through our music. You know, these things, they wouldn't be possible if my students didn't read. So again, it's none of these things are either ors. These are means to an end to get all kinds of goodness out of our curriculum. Now, one aspect that I want to go into here as well, and I put this in the thread, but not a lot of people have seen it, I don't think. It's pretty recently dropped in there, is that at no point so far have we even talked about the neurological benefits of teaching kids to read. That's where we get into the moral imperative territory. In a school setting, I actually think it's immoral to not put music literacy at the center of the curriculum at all ages. Immoral. And I know those are strong words, but here's why. The brain benefits, the neurological benefits of building literacy skills are too well studied and proven to ignore. If you are a music teacher who does not know what is going on in a student's brain when they learn to read a new language, which is the same part of the brain, by the way, when they're learning to read music, as they are when they're learning to read any other language, plus more. Learning to read music and perform from sheet music is one of the only full brain, light up the entire brain scan activities that we know that exists, because it activates every single part of the brain. And there are very few activities that do that. And it does have to be music that is learned through the literacy process, through the reading process, in order to get that brain benefit. Now, that does not mean, I'm not, again, because the straw mans will come, he's saying that it's like morally better. No, I'm saying it's just neurologically better. Okay, so in a school setting, which is different than a church setting, you might be in the praise band at your church and you're not reading the music off a sheet, and that's fine. Again, I am not criticizing that. But we are a school. We are talking about the school. So my job, I believe, is to build the brain of that student, which means that I owe it to them to give them the best brain workout that we know of that exists. I would direct everyone to the Music in the Brain series to learn about this. There's also a great YouTube video about music in the brain. It's a little cartoon video that kind of explains what's happening in your brain when you read music. Like these things, we owe that to kids, especially kids who are struggling readers like my own child, and kids who have learning disabilities, kids who have motor skills deficiencies, kids who have social skills deficiencies. They are all benefited. Dyslexic kids, like my goodness, there are so many benefits to learning to read music. We owe it to them. To deprive them of it, because we don't want to center that in our curriculum, because we just want to maybe have a unit on sight reading, but the rest of the time we're going to like learn by rote or whatever. No, sorry, no. That is, we are depriving them of that brain workout that actually can be shown to increase their brain health and their intelligence level. We are educators. We are educators. I also got a comment on Instagram that I think is really good because I think it gets at where some of the backlash is coming from and the disagreement. It says yes, absolutely to the statement, to the claim. This person agrees that if we don't teach vocal ped well and literacy well, that we're in trouble. But, he says, under the umbrella of vocal pedagogy and pedagogy of music literacy is human connection, kindness, relatability, relevance, balance, reflecting community, listening, humor, all the things many could argue are central to good vocal technique. So it's not just sound technique and reading skills in a vacuum, but more so a humane approach to something that is inherently emotional and subjective. Will choral music in the classroom sustain itself from high-quality vocal and literacy instruction? Will choral music in the classroom sustain itself from high-quality vocal and literacy instruction? Absolutely. But the journey there is more subjective than I think most think. It could at times be nothing you or I could imagine. Okay, so mostly I agree with that. I replied, you are right that it isn't technique in a vacuum. But those are social emotional skills. Those are not vocal pedagogy skills. And it is not, I don't think, a smart idea for us to combine those things into one umbrella. Because it's like, if I'm a doctor, I want to know precisely the cause of the problem. I need to be able to tell if a kid's issue with their vocal health or an issue with their technique is a technique problem or if it's a social emotional problem. But if they're all under the same umbrella, those things become obscured. So again, the point is not to say that the social emotional skills that we help develop with our students so that they feel comfortable enough to sing, he's exactly right. We have to do those things. But that is not vocal pedagogy. That's not what that means. That is social emotional learning. That is its own thing. And as I will argue later, you have to do that in every subject. Yes, choir and singing is more inherently vulnerable than a lot of subjects. I totally recognize that. However, SEL is something that's part of a component of education in any subject. So we need to still be able to name our terms and describe them. Vocal pedagogy is the science of singing and how to teach it. So yeah, I mean, I get where people are coming from, and I think again, every time somebody comes on these posts, they're projecting a meaning that I didn't present. But this is why this conversation is so important, because right now, because of these back and forths, there are people who are able to slide in their opinion that the quality of the instruction does not matter as long as all of the SEL stuff is happening. That is what I'm pushing back against. That is where I draw the line. The SEL stuff is not enough. If that is something that is helping us get to the content that we are supposed to teach, great. But if it stops at happy kids, quote unquote, then we are in dereliction of our duty. Jumping over now to my personal page where I had some responses. I got a lot of cheerleading responses on this one too. I did bring up that our undergrad music ed programs are barely touching this stuff, and I understand that there's not enough hours in the curriculum for them to teach the music teacher everything they would ever need to know. I get that, and an undergrad is not supposed to be the only bit of education. However, it is a travesty that the thing that keeps showing up in poll after poll after poll that I run, that are the two most important things we teach, how to read music and how to sing well, are very, very lightly touched on in music education programs. In fact, it is that problem right there that has made this show so popular. Okay, so yes, we talk about other stuff on the show like social justice issues and race and culture, and we talk about music history sometimes, and we talk about COVID, and we talk about all these different things. But my most popular episodes by far are my vocal ped and my literacy episodes. That is the people speaking. If I ever heard, like, I'm putting all these things on my podcast feed, and the ones that people go and listen to in droves are the ones that help them do their job every day. The ones that help them do their jobs better and build their programs and create all of these good things, these downstream effects that are really, really important. And so our colleges and universities need to step it up, in my opinion. They need to look at what they're offering and cut out the fat, cut out the things that are not necessary, and get young teachers the tools. Even though I would rather they keep coming to me, but the colleges do need to do that. Another one is I thought was a really good comment here. Another really good comment here, and this is a really good point, and this is that chicken and egg thing, is that somebody said, equally likely that the future of the profession depends on a well-funded education system and continuing to build a culture that values the arts. And I agree. However, I just believe that the chicken is before the egg. In other words, if the politicians are sitting around trying to decide which programs to cut, and they look in their geographical region, and they see choir programs that are withering on the vine, and that when they do come out to perform in public, they're singing, and they sound like little kids. Maybe they're high school kids, but they still sound like little kids, and they're doing really, really easy music that doesn't seem impressive to anyone. And that their programs are dwindling. Maybe the youth choir program's non-existent. There's just like maybe the marching band is like the whole deal in there. Okay, then maybe that program gets cut then. But if that same politician is looking and they see a huge thriving program that is performing, music that spans centuries and highly complex, and even if they don't know anything about choral music, they see kids engaged in this high quality, intense choral program that is singing all the styles and all the time periods, and people keep signing up for these classes. That politician is much less likely to cut that program because they would get major blowback. But if they see that the program people aren't passionate about it, then they know they're not going to get blowback if they cut it. So these things are important to keep the politicians' grubby hands off of us as well. We've got to be delivering the goods that we are being paid to deliver. And then I got a comment here that said, that agreed with my post, that said, this is so true, and with our profession taking a hard left turn to make fun and accessible, to make music fun, in quotes, and accessible, we are doing a tremendous disservice to the profession. As a professor of music education, I'm quite concerned for the future. So if you'd like to participate in these conversations, of course, you can head to any of these posts. You can find them on my personal Facebook page, on the Choralospher's Facebook page, and on the Choralosophy Podcast Facebook page, which you should like if you don't already like. So I recognize, as we finish this, I recognize that some folks could feel like I'm taking a very strong stand. Well, you'd be right. You'd be right. I've talked about this topic a lot. However, with the recent kind of uproar, I guess you could say, about the ACDA convention, the national convention, having almost none, almost no sessions offered on these nuts and bolts issues of how to deliver our core content, how to teach kids to read and how to teach them to sing well. There's a little bit of the pedagogy stuff on the convention, very little. So you're looking at 60, 65 sessions or whatever, and maybe one or two things on either of these topics. People are frustrated about that. And I think that if we don't start drawing a line in the sand of what the soul of our profession is and what the core of our profession is, why do we deserve a job? Why do we deserve to be made different or distinguished from other subjects? Then we need to start having some non-negotiables and some standards that you just can't skip. You stop being a music educator when you stop teaching these things, a vocal music educator. Now, I will also point out that in our band and orchestra colleagues' worlds, they are not having these arguments the same way we are. Think about it. If you are a band teacher, you can't skip music reading or the technique of playing the instrument. Those have to be your core curricular elements. In fact, that's going to make up 85% of your class period every day. That is what you have to obsess about those things, and you have to turn them into little playing machines. Right? They are not arguing about this, because if you had somebody say, maybe being a band teacher is not so much about them reading music and not so much about them learning how to play the clarinet, you'd get laughed out of the room. Only in vocal music are we having this argument. And of course, that should be obvious as to why. Because everybody's got a voice. And we can sing by rote. Yes, some players, I know, some players can play by ear, but that's really rare. Almost every human can sing by ear. So it's a little bit of a different thing. And so in a classroom setting, we are having arguments that our band colleagues and our orchestra colleagues are leaving us in the dust on this, because they're able to create these programs that look and can be backed up with rigor, because you can't do it without it. Now, I'm going to argue that choral and vocal music is just as important. We should be treating it and teaching it as if it is an academic subject. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say and what you think about this. I want to keep this conversation going because I really do believe that this is the most important conversation. Not to say that listening to me talk about it is the most important thing, but I think this topic of what are our non-negotiables in our profession and how do we learn how to do them better, it is more important than any other professional development that we could be offered. Thanks for listening to me ramble and rant. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this conversation, or even if it pissed you off, jump over to Choralosophers and make your comments. Of course, if you liked it, you can share and bring other people into the conversation. Leave a rating on the podcast app. Enter Choralosophy at checkout at sightreadingfactory.com. Yeah, go teach your kids how to read music with Sight Reading Factory. Get 10% discount. You can get choir folders and lots of other paraphernalia for choir at mymusicfolders.com. Choir robes at mychoirrobes.com. Enter Choralosophy at checkout at all of those websites, and you can get a discount. And then, of course, you can buy sheet music, which would be cool if your kids knew how to read, at ryanmain.com and at graphitepublishing.com. You can enter Choralosophy there as well to get a discount. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and it's been fun rambling with you. I'll see you next time.